Welcome to Finding the Front, brought to you by the proudly West Australian company, Euroz Hartleys. This is a podcast series where we take time out to get to know the story behind the people who front some of Western Australia's leading companies. We look back at some of the moments in their life and career that shaped the journey to being the leader they are today, and provide you with some real insights into the way they think and approach things, both in business and in life. So get the volume adjusted in your car or your headphones sorted and settle in for a great story. Here is your Finding the Front host, Tim Banfield.
Hey everyone, and great to have you listen in to episode 7 of Finding the Front. This is an absolute ripper and includes a special guest we've been really looking forward to having on the show. Ian Wells is the Group Chief Financial Officer of Fortescue Metals Group, one of Western Australia and Australia's most iconic companies. I've known Ian since we grew up together in the small country town of Quairading, but watching his career path to where he is now and seeing what he has been able to achieve has been really quite something. In Finding the Front, he provides us with a fantastic insight into his journey, his experiences, some great stories, and what an amazing opportunity it has been to be part of the Fortescue business. So without further ado, let's get started. It's a real privilege to introduce to Finding the Front, Mr. Ian Wells. Wellsy, welcome to Finding the Front. Thanks a lot for coming along. We know you're a very busy man, like extremely busy, and you've been able to take some time out of your busy schedule to come and join us. Really appreciated. And I know we've known each other all our lives, but yeah, in a different circumstance, here we are, able to wax about what's going on in your world. And it's really interesting to be able to get some insights into what has been an absolutely decorated career, both professionally but also family-wise. So thanks again, mate.
Well, thanks for having me, Tim. I really like what you're doing with these podcasts and giving people real insights into the real people behind WA's business community. So it's a real privilege, mate. So thanks.
Good on you. Look, so I just want to go back to the early days where you grew up, and you're a country boy, and we both grew up in Quairading. And I just think it's a really important point to really drill down on is your upbringing and the fact that you had a pretty close family of 6 and how that all unfolded growing up in the town of Quairading. Just give us a little bit of an insight. Born and bred.
Yeah, very proud Quairading boy. Anyone who will listen, I'm really proud to say I grew up in Quairading. I guess as we talked through it, I didn't end up spending a lot of time there. I sort of left as a 15, 16-year-old to go off to boarding school. But, it's those formative years, and interesting, later in life, I found out that we were born on Balladong, Noongar country. And of course, that's an important part of the story as well, and a connection to what I used to call the country, which are now called country, in the way that the Aboriginal people talk about country. And your connection back to that, connection back to family and friends is something that I draw on, particularly in difficult times of, what would this do or what would that do? And my upbringing in Quairading was very simple. Dad was a painter and renovator. Nowadays you'd probably call that a contractor. In my youth, I was very focused on sport, probably focused on 3 things, banners. The first one was sport, the second one was sport, and the third one was sport. You'd be playing cricket in summer and footy in winter and, down the local pool. And it was a really carefree life, but I learned lots of valuable lessons, including the value of hard work, living on the land and living in the country. We were townies as opposed to, on the farm. Dad and my brother had the family business. My older brother worked in the family business, and on the holidays and stuff, I'd go off to work with them because, what else you got to do? And in hindsight, getting to spend that time with my brother and dad was really valuable because you kind of never get that back. But it was the value of hard work. I wasn't a pedestrian in those days. I learned how to paint and renovate, and when you're out at someone's property and something doesn't go quite according to plan, you can't just pop down to Bunnings and grab some more screws and stuff. So you make it work, and the value of hard work was a really important part. Because again, if you think about a painter and renovator working in a town of 200 odd people, perhaps 2,500 people in the community, your current job is going to dictate your next job. If you don't do a good job, then, you're, as you said, 4 kids, providing for your 4 kids is really important. You got to get it right. And, in that such a small town, a painter and renovator, I can't ever imagine, I can't remember Dad not having work. And in the most part, he was always sort of 3 months behind. So that's a bit of an insight into the start of the story, if you like.
Puts a bit of emphasis on word of mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And, it's a bit like if you don't get the job right, you're not going to get another job. And therefore, you're putting your family at risk. And so what do? You get it right. And, that was a sustainable life. It was a pretty simple life. You rode the ebbs and flows of the commodity markets, the wheat price or the sheep price, and, the extensions got done in the good years, and, maybe a bit of maintenance got done in the not so good years. But anyway, we kind of got through it. But, I really valued that time, and also, good manners, doing the right thing, integrity, respect, those sorts of things. Doing what you say you're going to do is really, really important. And in a country setting, as you say, word of mouth, you do the right thing, that gets out. You do the wrong thing and everyone knows about it pretty quick.
And your mum, Peg, she sadly just recently passed away, but she was an iconic character in the town. I would see her smiling, beautiful face. I can still picture it. She had such a role to play within your family, but also the community, very community-minded. And I can see that in the Wells family. How did you find that growing up? Your mum was really quite passionate about the community of Quairading.
Well, growing up was quite intimidating when I think back, because of the, Dad's role in the community, Mum's role in the community. My elder sister was highly regarded. My second sister had left and gone to Perth, similarly highly regarded. My brother was a sporting legend. He's I think it was 8 or 9 premierships with Quairading. Have won on 8 or 9 premierships in the town's history. He's been part of 4 or 5 of them, and as many premierships. So, you're living to these expectations. So I'm the youngest of 4 by 10 years. So I was, a next generation. And so, growing up with amazing role models, both in the family and in the community, set you up for success. And the continued drive to be better is driven off the folks that you aspire to be like. And so, sadly, as you say, Mum passed away, and you don't get to see that firsthand because, you live and you've been with your parents and so forth. But to then, go to Quairading and see the community respect and support, and have the town hall, chock-a-block full of people paying their respects to Mum, was overwhelming and a proud time. Sadly, we lost Dad. It's 26 years ago now. So, and that's part of the story as well, where, I reflect back of working with my brother and Dad back in the day, of how precious that time was without actually necessarily knowing
At the time.
what was coming. And so, it's a good reminder of making the most of now and the present, and what you've got now and the good things you've got now, because you just don't know what's coming down the track. I was 26 years old, and my dad passed away, or our father passed away.
So, Wellesley, I just wanted to quickly come back to the role that sport, in your early stages, the role that sport played. You alluded to your brother Mark being a fantastic footballer. He was a gifted footballer, probably still is if you wanted to play. Yourself, you were very gifted as well. And I know that you played junior sport early, but then you went on to play a lot with men at an early age. Tell me the role model side of it, and the learning the values of teamwork was instilled in you very early. Just want to give us a bit of an insight into that.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, I was probably, I enjoyed cricket more than footy. And to put that into perspective, I don't know, 12 or 13, I realised that the seniors, so back in those days, Quairading had 4 cricket teams, you recall, and we had 2 turf wickets, and 2 games going a week. And I remember being somewhere and someone said, they were short. So I would be praying on a Sunday morning that someone wasn't going to turn up at the seniors so that I could play. And sure enough, Quairading, someone wasn't there, and Don Bland or Ken Bland, Rack Walker, somebody gave me, I was the 12th man, but playing the 11th man, and I would field at fine leg and, be the 11th batter. And then during the batting, I'd be praying that I'd get to have a bat. And so in some weekends, I'd be playing juniors in the morning and seniors in the afternoon. And, that real passion for the game, and you just literally can't get enough of it. And then, of course, you'd go to school and you'd be thinking about the next weekend. And so role models in that sense, I remember Don Bland saying to me, we were walking off after the fielding session, and I said, geez, I hope I can get a bat this week. And he said, don't worry, champ, good things come to those who wait. That's 40 years ago, or I don't know, 30 odd years ago, and that sort of stuck with me. And these really good quality people with good values of do what you say you're going to do, playing your part in the team and feeling part of the team, and I don't know, field 4 balls in the whole match, and loved the whole thing, and got frustrated as well of I just want to be involved and be part of it. And so that led into, and it's a lot of the learnings as a young person, and it kind of starts then to become natural, and the feeling of doing the right thing. It's very easy, some respects being in the flow and in the game, and playing against guys that were much bigger never really dawned on me, to be honest. All I wanted to do was contribute to the team and play well and make a contribution. And similarly, like these role models who, these guys were amazing cricketers and people, and aspiring to be like them, of course, is unbelievably empowering. And you couldn't get better. So it's incredibly fortunate to do that. That's not only the white people, but also playing with the Indigenous, the Winmars and the Collards, and you remember Derek Collard, who was good at every single sport known to mankind. And you just kind of go, I want to be like him. I didn't see any difference between the colour of your skin, and it was just really high quality people. And for me, that was in a sporting context.
So, mate, you finished up with Quairading, as you say. You got through the schooling element of that, and Bob and Peg said, right, time to pull up the socks, and off you went to Masnoid College.
Mm.
So that would have been a little bit of a change to go away.
Yeah,
leave home.
Somewhat of a culture shock.
Yeah,
Banners, as I said, 250 people in town. My year 10 class, there's 15 of us. 5 boys and 10 girls. I quite liked those odds and never really replicated them ever again in my life, but nonetheless. And then went to boarding school, and so it was 50 boarders. That was pretty intimidating, and over 100 year 11. So the first day of classes, I remember going up to the classes and being quite overwhelmed, because 100 kids, all boys, most of them twice the size of me, because I was a little tacker in those days. I hadn't quite had my growth spurt yet. 100 young men was the most people I'd ever seen in one place at one time in my life, in terms of the microcosm of Quairading, and I'm in Lesmurdy. It was very intimidating, culture shock, going from knowing 15 people in the class. I knew all of them for 15 years, so new folks, homesickness, all that stuff.
All came through.
Really, it was tough. It was, as they say, character building.
Character building, yeah. That is where you started to learn a bit about independence, I'm sure, though. You touched on it earlier.
Yeah, that's right. And boarding school for me was very good, because very focused on sport. So Masnoid was a big sporting school, straight into first 18 footy, cricket, more than you could ever imagine. So that was really good. The other thing that was good for me was the structured life of boarding school. Everyone else was studying, so I was studying.
Yes.
Prior to that point, Tim, I wasn't very good at studying. Well, not very good at it. Let's say report cards along the lines of shows talent, lacks application was fairly consistent.
Yes.
So, I did enough to get through, but boarding school was very good for me. The structured approach, everyone else was studying. That's what everyone else did. And so to fit in, that's what you did. So I did very well in TE, I think it was called, then got good marks out of that, and that sort of set me up for the next stage.
So this is quite an interesting stage of life, which I'm sure that you've come across through your conversations with aspiring students, people who are looking to get some career advice. Did you know what you wanted to do when you left school? I know that you went on to do a Bachelor of Business at Curtin University. But was that to keep your options open, or was it a deliberate choice to go down a financial path?
It's a really good question. I was reflecting on this recently. In year 11, when they say need to start thinking about what you want to do at uni and so forth, and I was high conviction teacher.
Right.
And it had probably felt that way for quite some time. And the sports side of angle of things, phys ed teacher sounded bloody perfect to me because that's not work at all. So that's an important part of your choice is, well, have a think about what you want to do rather than what others are thinking, and where's your passion? What excites you? And so that's what I want to be. So it turns out that the application of studying and so forth, I'm pretty good at accounting and maths. And I think someone said to me, accounting's a good one because you get paid really well as an accountant. So living a humble existence, growing up, it's like, okay, so I think it's important to earn some good money. So I don't know, I put accounting down as my preference, and off I went to got accepted, and it was very exciting, and I went off to Curtin to do a Bachelor of Business.
So by getting the degree done and through that period, so you ended up playing league football for Perth Football Club here in the West Australian Football League, which is an outstanding effort. Yeah, I mean, it was a strong competition and you earned your stripes. It was around 1990, 1991 that you finished your degree. So football played a pretty big role through that period. High intensity training commitments, looking after yourself. When you got through that period, did you find that football had again anchored you in terms of meeting people, teamwork, a little bit of structure?
Yeah, I think elite sport, I guess, is something that you really have to commit to, and you really have to need and want to do it. And it was through that period as well that I met my wife, or Mandy, back in about was in 1991, which was sort of my second year at Perth.
Yes.
I'd played 7 games in the first year and sort of figured out how that all worked out, and then eight games in the second year. The second year was when I met Mandy, and we got married at the end of that year.
So how long have you been married to Mandy for?
28. Yeah, 28 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so what kind of all of that period of time where going back as a young kid, what were my aspirations in life? Well, to play cricket for Australia and play league footy, and so didn't get the cricket, but I got the league football, and I committed to it, but it wasn't going to be the future for me. So I guess I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity. I wouldn't call it a tick the box exercise, but I proved to myself that I could do it. What I realised with the study kind of side of things is I couldn't do both, and as you know, I'm a kind of all-in guy. I'm either going to do it or I'm not going to do it. And I wasn't going to be able to put the time and effort into a decade at Perth or other things that might have come if I was good enough. I didn't think personally that I was good enough to go to the next level, and so I chose to go down the route of a career. And the biggest impact on that was meeting Mandy and going, this is a serious deal, and if I'm going to offer anything to this beautiful woman, I need to get my shit together, as they say. And that's what I did. That's what I decided to. I put my mind to it, and following Perth, I played a couple of seasons in the Amos, which I remember we had a couple of games
cross paths
past each other. I was fast enough for you not to catch me, which was always important. And that was when my career started, and my very first job was 2 weeks of work experience at a company called ERG, and the 2 weeks of work experience came from a connection through Mandy. Got an introduction to the financial controller then at ERG. I convinced him to give me 2 weeks work experience. I wouldn't say beg, but it was pretty, as in how do you start a career? And this is where young people today have a real challenge, because everyone wants experience, but you can only start at the start. So being humble and vulnerable and saying, I need to start and I'm willing to do it for nothing. So I did 2 weeks of work experience.
So ERG at that point was a well-known smart card company.
Smart card manufacturing up on Balcatta Road, Balcatta.
Yes.
Iconic in that area. I had no idea what ERG did, said, whatever. It was like, no, I need some office experience. So I was doing accounts payable, accounts receivable, bank reconciliations. I don't know, whatever they gave me.
Yes.
I remember going in and looking at the computer. I've just come from uni and going, how do you turn that thing on? It's like, didn't really pay attention that much at uni, kind of get it done. So this is the real deal now. And so that 2 weeks of work experience, I was there for 4 years, finished my degree. pretty much 2/3 of the way through my CPA. So that 2 weeks of work experience gave me my first job.
Was where it started. So look, Wellesley, that's a good place to just kick off. I mean, Mandy's been a very pivotal part of your life, and I'm glad you brought it up early because you've got two wonderful kids with Mandy, Nathaniel and Jonica, and you know they're growing up. Jonica's getting married soon. Nathaniel's in Brisbane. So your life has moved forward, and you guys have experienced over that 28-year period some significant highs and some amazing lifestyle choices, but also that family network or that close-knit community is maintained. They're now clearly moving into state, and you've continued to grow your career. I just want to go back and say, well, you started on this trajectory. ERG was the start, but then you went into the health sector, in essence.
Yeah, because that makes perfect sense on your career, doesn't it? So
smart cards to health.
Smart cards to health, and so I wanted to start. Didn't really bother me where I started, and what I learnt at ERG was my love of management accounting, and because it was a commercial organisation, the financial accounting was done probably by somebody else, and I was part of one of the business units, and so management accounting, understanding what makes the business tick. I found a love of spreadsheets and key performance indicators and all those sorts of things. But what I was missing was being part of a team.
Yes.
And the leader of a team. So I wanted to be, that was what I was craving. So I applied for a few different jobs within the organisation and outside, and ended up getting an opportunity at Joondalup Health Campus, and as the finance and admin manager responsible for accounts receivable and accounts payable, something like that. And that was a really important driver. And again, getting back to sort of career advice, that was from where? Well, it was from my inspiration. That's what I wanted to do, and I put my mind to it, and so that's what I did. And I found this opportunity. Went and spoke to the folks. We got on really well. It was a kind of interview where they literally wanted you to start the next day. And this was when Joondalup Health Campus, which is now probably 1,000 or more beds. It's a massive business up at Joondalup. At that point in time, it was Wanneroo Hospital.
Right.
110 bed public-private hospital that was going to develop into what is now Joondalup. So it started at the bottom, and we worked our way through and built the hospital. But part of it was, why did I join? It wasn't because it was healthcare. It was a business. It was a job, and it was going to give me the things that I thought were important for my future career.
To form the foundation you needed.
To form the foundation, yeah, exactly right. So that was where I got my first leadership role and could instigate a lot of those things that I'd learned in the sporting sense on the value of teams doing the right thing, integrity, and being yourself. And so I found those formative years in the development of myself personally, the opportunity to do public speaking. Back in the Joondalup days, I put my hand up to do orientation. So Joondalup was recruiting a whole heap of public sector nurses to come and work for them. And so I did the finance section. Can you imagine this young whippersnapper explaining to on why you needed to make a profit and that. And it was very clunky at the start, but I put myself out there because I knew that public speaking in my heart was going to be something important in the future, and to be successful in this type of a role, and where I wanted to get going. So I put my hand up for it, and I actually still do that kind of stuff today, and really love it. So Joondalup for a number of years, and then got the opportunity to go to Melbourne. So we've lived in Melbourne a couple of times, and the first one was with Healthcare of Australia, which was the company that owned Joondalup, and I got the opportunity then to take the next step to go and work in a big private hospital in Heidelberg in Melbourne, and we spent 18 months in there before we came back to Perth, and ended up getting a role in healthcare, but in GP medical centres and physiotherapy. And again, sort of not necessarily linked, but part of it was not career-based, but that was very much a change driven by family.
So that's quite a huge foundation, but mainly in the healthcare sector. And I do note that after that period, you decided you've sort of moved into another path in essence, and you started a role with Alinta. Looking at that, it was quite a significant part of your career in that point, because you've now gone on to what is a very significant company. top 50 company, the largest Australian energy infrastructure owner and operator with approximately 3,200 employees. I mean, it's quite big. At that time, it had a market cap in excess of $7.5 billion.
Well, at the time, Alinta was a name that I knew because it was an energy company.
Yes.
I had really little to nothing, no idea about the company itself. And I chose to leave IPN on account of some cultural differences that I had with some folks within that business. And I'd made the decision that I wanted to leave for my own personal basis, that from a values perspective. And that was another pivotal point in my life where I got to the point where I felt like I couldn't make a difference within the organisation, even at a senior level, and I couldn't influence to the extent that I thought was necessary. So I quit, served out my 6 months notice, and through that sort of period, I found the Alinta role. And the story with Alinta, I got introduced to the CFO at the time through my network. Met him the first time, and he said, "Look, we're just going through an acquisition. Don't really have any roles at the moment. Call me back in I don't know, it was 3 months or 6 months. It felt like an eternity because I didn't have a job, and I'm thinking, champ, you need to sort this out, mate. So I was okay, no worries. So like 1 minute after the appointed time for him to call me back, I called him back, set up a meeting. I came in and sat down with him. So at that stage, I'd kind of got to the point of we need something to happen here. So he was very respectful and went through all the various things. And while we don't really have a position, I said, well, what about you just try me? I don't know much about your industry. You don't know much about me. What about a part-time role? So he says, oh yeah, there's a contracting role coming up in the planning and analysis team. I'm like, perfect. Thinking, what's planning and analysis? Anyway, it was in the finance team, so that was okay. So long story short, 3-month contract. I ended up being the head of the business unit, GM of the business unit, involved in some M&A, lots of M&A that we didn't do. The business doubled, if not tripled, through that period of time where Alinta was highly acquisitive, and through the planning, analysis and modelling division, we're modelling and reviewing all of these, and I became part of the core deal team along with a bunch of other highly successful businessmen in Perth. And I ended up so I started in 2004, 3-month contract. By 2007, I was the acting CFO of Alinta in the management.
I saw
buyout.
you were thrust into that role in the middle of a management buyout.
Yeah.
Now, quite a significant point in time of that company to be placed acting CFO. How did you handle that? Because there would have been competing interests.
Well, it was a difficult situation because you're working with a bunch of people who have decided to go and do a management buyout without telling you. And so it was quite an emotional, hold on, I thought we were all part of a team, but you guys have gone down a different path. So you sort of get through that, and then part of the management team that sort of stepped in were really the folks that the board had known. I hadn't had probably no interaction with the board at that stage, but the guy that they put in as the acting CEO at the time, I had spent a lot of time with.
Right.
So he knew me and I guess trusted me, and they saw something in me, quite frankly, that I didn't see myself. I never had aspirations of being the CFO at all. I don't think I'd attended one board meeting, and nonetheless I was put into the role, and a bit like going back out on the farm, there's nowhere to go but suck it up and get on with it and do the best you can. And that's what I did, and learnt the lesson of, as a part of the team, you look to the leader for guidance. Suddenly you're the leader. And I remember, one morning looking in the mirror and going, who's going to help me out with this stuff? And I said to myself, well, you are. It's up to you. And for me, that's quite empowering.
Yes.
And that's where I do my best work, to be quite frank. You don't want to be there the whole time, but when there's a job to do, gets back to job to do, part as the team.
And who's going to stand up?
Who's going to stand up and who's going to make it happen? And so I got a great opportunity. Hadn't been to a board meeting. I think we had 50 board meetings or something over that period of time. All this M&A stuff, in theory, it's actually in practice, and you're sitting there and through it. And I loved it, and it was terrifying all at the same time, mate.
Did you find it a steep learning curve?
A massive
Yep.
learning curve, and I learned a lot about how to represent yourself in a really strong way. And I had a lot of interaction with John Akehurst, who was on the board and stepped into the chairman role of the board, and other directors. And so I spent a lot of time watching, listening, and learning from John Akehurst. So I got a lesson in terms of John's highly successful businessman.
Yes.
In all respects, not just in business, but in life and values and those sorts of things. And sitting and watching was an unbelievable privilege to be part of that. And I draw back on those skills and experience that I received then to this day.
It's interesting with that role, and you're the ultimate purchaser of Alinta. That was Babcock and Brown had a role to play in that.
Yeah, so it was a joint bid between Babcock and Brown and Singapore Power. Singapore Power picked up all of the East Coast assets, and Babcock and Brown kind of picked up all the energy generation, which was mostly in Western Australia. And so the Singapore Power was then where I went and joined what they rebadged as Gemina. And so that then led to the 2007 move to Melbourne.
Back to Melbourne.
So Melbourne became an unbelievable experience for us because two things happened. We were in a position where financially we were fine. That part that you take the pressure valve came off, and Banners were in Melbourne. I mean, where else do you listen to, perhaps not these days, but, the footy's on digital radio. Like how good. Maddie didn't like it so much, but, just immersive. Every single, you go through all this, you talk about the four seasons, but in Melbourne it's the sport one thing after another, and you're the CFO of a large organisation. You get to experience things. That year we went to the grand final in the company's box on the train to the grand final. I'm sitting on the train. Man's just looking at me, going, I hadn't even got to the game yet, and the whole experience and getting back to my youth again of watching the winners and all that sort of stuff on the tiny little black and white crappy TV, and I'm going to the real AFL deal. Grand Final in a box as well. It's just unbelievable.
Christmas
so
had come early.
Life experience, just unbelievable. So there's many examples of that. I'd go into town and at work and have meetings and stuff and scratch myself and go, this. Imposter syndrome was massive because I'm like, someone's going to find out and say, surprise, Wellesley. Nah, this is not real champion. But so it was. It was a wonderful time for us.
Now, just coming back to what you learnt out of that experience, and when you look at their role with Alinta and with Gemina, it would have given you a unique insight into the Australian, but also Asia-Pacific energy marketplace and the requirements of that region. Is that right? You got a good feel for what the energy component of life here in the Asia-Pacific was about.
Yeah, so Gemina owned regulated and unregulated assets. And so the regulated assets, important assets, it's all about maintenance programs and reducing risk. The unregulated assets are about developing markets and more of a risk-taking, and that's where entrepreneurial sales and marketing and those sorts of things are important. And the business struggles with that because no risk versus risk are quite different. And when you want to grow your business and earn above regulated asset utility returns, you've actually got to take risk. But your whole business is built on mitigating and not taking risk. And so the business is quite challenged. So understanding that is really important, because if you take a regulated asset approach, most of these companies are also, or all of those regulated assets are investment grade. So an investment grade approach into entrepreneurialism and risk taking, two things very rarely do they actually line up. So understanding the difference is really important. How energy markets work, all those things and all that exposure, and balancing up safety as well. Obviously dealing with high voltage energy maintenance, people up on wires and all those sorts of things. So I've got a really good handle on that, and also a love of that kind of stuff at Fortescue. Over the years we've been involved in energy as it relates to an iron ore company, and so those insights have been really helpful with respect to the power stations, pipelines, and even all the things that we're doing at the moment and we'll do in the future is that, understanding how all that works and how you can then apply it in a business sense have been really valuable.
And so you have used, it does lend to the next question, where you did leave Alinta or Jamina, what it became, to then go to Fortescue. But the learning that you came out of that experience has been very helpful in your sort of career journey through Fortescue?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, business is business, and without getting hung up on, there's different acronyms and nomenclature within businesses, but ultimately it boils down to the basics, and all the basics are fundamentally the same. And we came back to Perth because the Gemina business and what I wanted to do with my career were inconsistent. And so, I'd really spent 5 years at, the collective business and 3 of those years in Melbourne with Gemina, and Steve Pearce joined Fortescue sort of in the February, called me in the April and said, hey, I've joined this company. I'm putting a management team together, got a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a really exciting company. Would you consider joining? And that was at a point in time where we were thinking about maybe coming back to Perth and sort of what was my next role going to be. And so we really took a punt of sorts on, well, back in Perth, mining company, good to get some mining experience, and working with someone that I'd worked with before who I knew and trusted. And, looking at the business, it excited me, like the things that were being done. It was quite interesting. So it was somewhat of a risk, but it wasn't based on the fact that I could apply the energy infrastructure at Fortescue. It was more that I'd gotten skills, and I took a punt on coming back to Fortescue. And of course, history would say been a pretty good move, and I've been able to apply a lot of skills from the things that I've learnt from all those different businesses, as well as particularly the energy infrastructure in a smaller sense, but also applying the application of key performance indicators across the business in the sense of a low margin business, where iron ore, certainly in the last few years, has been anything but a low margin business, been a very high margin business. But importantly, sticking to the basics will set you up no matter what the cycle is, good, bad or indifferent, but sticking to the basics is always going to see you do well.
Well, you'll move across to Fortescue, which at that point was the phenomenal third force in iron ore. And you started out as the group manager of funding, Treasury and Business Planning. And look, you're understated, so that was some 11 years ago. You moved into the role of Company Secretary in 2015, Acting Chief Financial Officer and Company Secretary in 2016. Then you were appointed to a newly established position of Group Manager Corporate Finance and Joint Company Secretary in 2017. And then in December 17, you were appointed Chief Financial Officer of Fortescue Metals Group. That's quite a journey. And I want to come back to it, but as you've grown into this role, how have you drawn on your experiences? So you've grown up in a country town, you've moved to Melbourne, you've gone and worked for some significant organisations. But here you are with a founder that is very entrepreneurial, that is a driving force, not only of commerce, but of entrepreneurialism and what he's been able to achieve. And here you are joining that massive movement. How did it feel, and how did you stand up to the challenge and meet that task?
Yeah, how did it feel? Exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time, almost on a daily basis. The entrepreneurial part was what I was missing at Gemina, and Andrew's vision and ability to encourage and engage people to execute on a vision is phenomenal, and that sort of speaks for itself. But just to put my journey into perspective for the folks that are listening, I joined because of the relationship that I had with Stephen Pearce, and I'd worked with him before. So I knew that part would work, and he completely empowering, and we didn't really know what needed to be done. First thing was to refinance some debt. The first thing I had to do was write my own job description. So just to put that into perspective, some debt needed to be refinanced, so I'll have a crack at that. Hadn't done a lot of that at that point in time, but have a go. So you can see the consistency back there.
Yes. So
we had a go. We did the first deal, and myself and the team have raised and refinanced on in excess of 35 or something US billion dollars since. So part of it was to have a go and to back yourself to ask questions, find out what it's all about, and just get in and do it. And so we went from relying pretty heavily on, lawyers and investment bankers' support to building an internal capability that would be as good as an investment banking group, simply by doing it and getting on with it and not feeling the need to know all the answers, but importantly to be able to ask the right questions,
Yes.
find out what needs to get done, and then get it done. And when you're working in an organisation that wants to know, how can I help you? What do you need? And let's make it happen. Make it happen is a catch cry of Andrew's, is, make it happen. And so what do we need to do to get it done? It was just incredible what was achieved. And this is the financing section, which was an enabler for the expansion of the business. And the whole organisation was focused on, every single person was working on something in relation to the expansion of the business. So it's pretty easy to make decisions when you go, well, okay, what do I need to do today? Okay, well, I need to do X and Y and Z, because that's where we're headed. And each step of Fortescue has been on the basis of the vision, and the current vision is clearly to move into an integrated metals and mining company and a green energy company. That's the vision. It's a very empowering position to be in, and to make it happen. And as leaders, you're encouraged and empowered to explain what do we need to do and ask the right questions, be humble, share your vulnerabilities, all those things. And people get up and do it and achieve the impossible. And there's a number of examples through the years. You just go,
there sure is.
And in the most part, folks said it can't be done.
Just coming back a step though, Dr. Forrest founded the company in 2003. It's currently got a market capitalisation of in excess of $60 billion. You joined in 2010, and it's quite an integral part of the funding part that you talk about. I look at the deals, US $5 billion institutional term loan. You have received in these financing arrangements 2013 Deal of the Year for Asia Mining Congress, North America Leverage Loan of the Year. It's quite huge for someone and your team. Can you just talk us through that period of time? And when you're raising this sort of money, what are the sort of conversations you're having for an emerging iron ore producer?
Well, that's a big question, Ben. I think first of all, I'd say I'm just part of the team. That one person, or even you see the headlines that says Andrew Forrest has raised $15 billion this week, or whatever the headline is. Clearly, he's the leader of the organisation, and a whole heap of people are involved in this, and a whole group. It's important. Part of it is, well, what do we need to do and support the business and the livelihoods of, back in those days it was probably 5,000 people, and nowadays it's about 10 or 15,000 people's livelihoods.
Yes.
What do we need to do to achieve our objectives? And on these deals, I don't think there was ever any thought about this is going to be the greatest deal ever, or the biggest deal that's ever been done, or it's never been done before. It was more about what was required and how do we collectively bring our minds together. And there's a fair bit of strategy involved in all of this as well. And it's the planning side of things which comes to the fore on the execution, and then the conversations with various folks always comes back to what's the right thing for the company. And you've got advisors, bankers, lawyers, accountants, etc., who are advisors, but ultimately it's our responsibility to make the right decision for the company in the long term. And when you take that approach, then irrespective of the outcome, you've done the right thing.
Yes.
And when you're empowered to do that, that's where, when you get into, for me, backing me into a corner, it'll take a fair bit, but that's when you'll get the best out of me. And what that's taught me over the years is that you don't need to get backed into a corner to get the best.
Yeah.
The best out of you. So these deals were, again, terrifying and invigorating all at the same time, but ultimately the measure of success wasn't the deal, but it was the consequential impact to the organisation, the company. There was a number of deals that had their challenges, but it was never in any doubt, because we knew that whatever was required, we were going to be able to do it, because we were empowered to do it, and that was what was needed. And when your advisors understand that as well, it's interesting how your advice starts to change.
Yes.
Starts to become long term. We've had folks that have been advising us now for 12 or 13 years, not because we don't have anyone else, it's because that's who we choose to do, and it's always a challenge to choose who's going to take us to the markets each and every time. But they keep keep delivering for us because it's the right thing for the company. Sort of a hard thing to get your head around, that a simple country boy from Quairading can be involved in this and be in the middle of it. And I guess it's only when you sort of reflect back, because at the time, when you're, let's call it, in the heat of battle, you just get on with it and do it, and you don't.
Yes.
The good thing about that, you don't have too much time to think about it. And a number of those transactions, failure wasn't an option, but it was never going to be a failure either way, because we'll just figure it out on the way through and do the right thing. And sure enough, you get to the end and go, yeah, that was pretty cool.
And that team at the time that was executing this were clearly close, clearly driven, and clearly no wasn't an answer in the end. We had to get it done.
Yep, that's right. And there was a number of different circumstances, a number of different work streams that were happening at the same time. We had folks literally all over the world in different time zones and time frames, and literally every single person was asking the question, what's my role? What do I need to do? What help do you need? You get on the phone, and literally the whole company's behind you, and it all comes down to those sort of deal team situations where you bunker in and it's whatever's required, and
Yes.
and when you know that even if you make a mistake, you're going to be supported, it means you very rarely make a mistake.
Yes.
So that goes to culture, goes to leadership, and leadership across the whole organisation, and not just the folks involved. So that the power of that, what I've learnt out of that is at Fortescue, I've learnt, and we learn, the art of the possible.
The art of the possible.
The art of the possible, as in, rather than limiting your thinking to the past or the present, what is the art of the possible? What would clean sheet of paper? If you had a clean sheet of paper, what would you like to do? Because doing things differently is exactly what Fortescue has always done. And so therefore, when you think about it, I often explain our capital structure to our bankers. The capital structure is quite different, but it has to be different because everything about Fortescue is different. From our exploration, from our development, our approach to energy infrastructure, mining, it's all different. And we've been successful because we've done things differently, and people have gone, there's a better way to do that. And you go, well, why haven't you introduced it? You don't have to have that second conversation. Why haven't you introduced it? If there's a better way of doing it, let's do it. Has anyone else done it before? And if the answer is no, generally that's the thing that we'll do. for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
And that's where that sort of risk management that I spoke about earlier, taking risk as a mining company, you have to get to be successful. You've got to be able to manage, identify and manage risk, and Fortescue does that very well.
So through this process, over the cumulative years prior to you being opened up for the possibility of being this Chief Financial Officer of Fortescue, can you talk about the process of you being appointed? It's quite an honour, firstly, to be appointed such a senior role within the organisation. And you had started in 2010. Here we are 7 years later, and you've been appointed that role. Talk to us a little bit about that, and clearly you've earned the right, but just a little bit of background and how that unfolded.
So entitlement is something that I never understood, still don't understand. So therefore, as you say, the honour is right. You sort of rattled through a few of my different roles, and so I'd sort of been in the funding, corporate finance for a while, and we had a restructure of the finance team, and I got offered a couple of roles, and which I didn't really like, and the company secretary role was up, and as you said, I was the company secretary for a couple of years, and the reason why I took that role was because it was a progression to CFO, and so I'd seen what being CFO was like at Gemina. I joined Fortescue to help out and do whatever was required, and so I'd done that, and I was still wanting to, what's the next step? Quite clearly, CFO is the next step. So I'd made that decision in my mind, and what company secretary did for me was a progression, because I'd never really been involved in that in detail, and I thought that's going to give me exposure to the board as well, which obviously the further up the chain you go, that's an important thing to consider. And so I did that role for a couple of years. As a commerce guy, I think I balanced up and helped with some systems and processes and procedures, and more recently, or a few years ago, we've got a new company secretary who is an expert, and I kind of think back and go, oh, holy cow, how did I survive in that, because I'm so not as good as what he does, technically. But nonetheless, what that did was that I spent a lot of time with the board, in the board, and with the board more broadly. And so when Stephen Pearce left and the CFO role came up, I went for the role, myself and a couple of others internally, ended up missing out on that. But 12 months later, I'm then appointed to CFO, because post that point, Ned Power resigned. Elizabeth was appointed to CEO. She was then CFO at the time, and I was appointed to CFO. And how that process rolled out was there was clearly things going on in the background, and the resolution hadn't happened yet. And I'm mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. The country boy, I love mowing the lawn. Enjoy doing manual labour. And I get a call on the phone, and it's Andrew Forrest. Wellesley, are you home? Yep, I'm home. He said, I want to come and can I come and see you? And I said, yeah, of course. I'm kind of looking at myself with my, mowing apparel on. This is probably not appropriate for the chairman to pop over. Put the phone down, and Mandy looked at me. She said, oh, what's wrong? So obviously the blood had drawn from my face probably. And I said, oh, Andrew wants to come over and talk to me. She said, what about? And I said, I don't know. He didn't say. So I guess it's a reflection of Andrew's personable nature. He comes over for a cup of tea, literally. So have a cup of tea, like the kitchen table cup of tea kind of thing you'd have at the Banfield homestead, except it's Andrew Forrest, the chairman. So he comes in with a bit of preamble and a bit of a chat, and he said, Wellesley, I want you to be the CFO of Fortescue. And it was pretty amazing to sort of get there, because the journey was not without, there's plenty of times where that wasn't even, a possibility, and, an amazing journey. But to be able to share that with Mandy as well was pretty special. In my usual, wittiness, I sort of said to him, oh, can you leave it with me? I'll get back to you, and just, laughed it off and gave him a cuddle and said, of course, and whatever you need, I'm there. And so it was a really special time. And Nathaniel at the time was still in Perth. He was at work, came home, and Andrew's car's parked in the driveway, and Nathaniel storms in, just about to say, I can't park my car, and he's his jaws dropped, and he goes, oh, g'day champ, I'm Andrew Forrest. And Nathaniel, and he said, I'm just over asking your dad to be the CFO of Fortescue. And Nathaniel said, well, what did he say? So a bit of family humour. So that was back in, I guess, 2017, and doing the role since, and really enjoying the role.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. That is a really, really good insight. So with the CFO role and Elizabeth as CEO, the company's gone from strength to strength. Have you drawn, one thing I've noticed when I look through the things that Fortescue stand for, the values, really do come through so strongly. Those values, I would say, would resonate really well with your upbringing, family, exactly. Enthusiasm, integrity, to name a few. And I know they're really critical to the cultural result that Fortescue has, and the way that the business and the operations and the company itself overall really conducts itself. Just having the opportunity to listen to the way Fortescue executives present, you can't help but be drawn into that. It's a really important thing. Have you just sort of embraced, it's almost like it's a perfect fit for you in terms of where you've come from?
It is, Tim, and one of the things from my career and personal development, being the leader and being part of the leadership group is really empowering to hold people. What comes naturally and is really easy is to hold people accountable to the values which I hold dear to myself, which, as you say, that's really empowering, that you can say with confidence, this is what we're going to do, and this is what I'm going to show in actions, not just in words.
Yes.
This is what I'm going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And as I really focused on the finance team to start off with, and using the finance team as this is how we're going to do things, and doing what you say you're going to do, having the privilege of speaking to folks and upholding the values in words and actions was really empowering for me. And what I realised is once I became and was appointed the CFO of Fortescue, for a lot of my mentors and people who know me well go, well, that's a natural progression. But it wasn't a natural progression for me personally. For me personally was, okay, now that I've made it, because I have a title, I finally allowed myself to be myself.
Yes.
And I share that story because we spend so much time and energy trying to be what we think others want us to be. It is a waste of time. I am in the position where I can't believe it took me 50 years to work that out. And so suddenly you're just being yourself. And it's, you have your trials and your tribulations. You don't always get it right. But coming back to those values and being true to yourself and true to your purpose, true to your values, family, integrity, trust, all those things is the way to go. And that's where you get the best out of yourself and as a consequence from others. It's a huge privilege to be able to do that, but it's also a responsibility as well.
Yes, yes. And that responsibility goes across all areas in your role. And I look at the key points of, we talked about culture, but safety, inclusiveness, that's across gender, but also a huge role within Fortescue is the inclusiveness within the Indigenous culture and also the respect of that culture. I know you've got a real affiliation with that as well. Just give us a little bit of an insight into that and the way you're being able to sort of, I suppose, your upbringing, having gone to school in a very diversified school, being Quairading Primary through to Quairading Senior School and then Mazanoid. How's it sort of all come together and helped you?
Yeah, I think the stereotype of, executive, firstly, CFO, secondly, the stereotypes associated with that is that I'm reasonably rebellious naturally, so I like to surprise people. And so, going up on site, whether it's the general manager, role is irrelevant, race is irrelevant, upbringing is irrelevant. They're people. And these people, I love and adore all of them, speak to them all the same. When I do presentations or explaining something in my teacher role, folks really resonate with it because I'm teaching it to them in their language, not mine.
Yes.
Why? Because I respect them. And what I'm trying to do is communicate to people in words and phrases and explanations that make sense to them. And that's a really important part of communication, is to think about your audience. And so I engage with people because I truly care about them. And when they talk to me and when we interact, it's not because I tell them that I care about them. They can tell by virtue of the conversation. And so being yourself is a pretty powerful thing because people go, yeah, okay, cool. All right. What's this guy? What do you want us to do, man? Okay.
Yep.
And so, again, that privilege to be in that position, but also, interestingly, the psychology of having the title to then go, okay, now I'm allowed to do this. So some of the sort of respectful upbringing of, get your superiors or your parents' approval to do stuff is that at some point in your life you've got to realise that now it's up to you. You're the parent, which is quite frightening in itself. But perhaps another story. Mandy often gives me, get interesting, the more senior you get in an organisation. We talk about the loneliness of leadership. Raleigh talked about that in his podcast, which I really liked that as well. The loneliness of leadership. And you get feedback, mostly the kind of feedback to, let's call it, improved performance. Particularly Australian culture, feedback on the other is sucking up to the boss or that type of stuff, So the important feedback loop just in life, it's really clearly identified as a senior leader, is that if you're relying on the external feedback loop, you're going to be sadly in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really, okay, so what are my KPIs? How am I going to live my life? And, you know, I've worked that out through attrition, that the things that matter to me, and the other stuff that goes on, that helps with the distraction factor of, you know, this person doesn't like me, or you get some feedback of, you know, that didn't go well, or you should do this or do that. And the point is, the stuff that's going to help you develop and be a better person, better leader, better family member, that's the stuff you take on. And because it's important to you on the inside, so it's more of an inside feedback loop rather than the outside, I guess, is a really important part of. And if you get into it, successful leaders have been able to manage that sustainably.
Yes.
Because they're on the internal feedback loop, as in, you know, we've got a long-term strategy, that's where we're going. Cool. All the other stuff's just a distraction, because that's where we're going. That's
the end goal.
What we're going to do. These are our values. Another big thing for me is focusing on the things you can control. In a work sense, you know, we'll articulate that in relation to production or whatever it might be. But getting distracted on things that you can't control is again another energy sapper.
It's been a phenomenal year for Fortescue in terms of the results. The net profit after tax, $10.3 billion. Annual shipment of in excess of 180 tonnes. C1 cost of $14 a tonne. Phenomenal metrics.
Mm.
How does the company continue to adjust for the fluctuation in iron ore price, given it's been quite strong for a period of time? But clearly, like any other commodity, we have our ups and downs. The company's built for the long term. Yeah,
and it gets back to a few things that I said earlier, is that getting the fundamentals right, irrespective of the market cycle. You know, whether it's the wheat farm or, you know, commodity cycles will find you out quickly, particularly in a down cycle if you haven't got the fundamentals right. And you can't always, you know, if you can't survive through that, you won't get to the other side. So, you know, our results last year were phenomenal, somewhat to do with the iron ore price, but mostly to do with because we've got the fundamentals right and we're executing on our strategy. We've been progressively improving our product mix. We're focused on cost control, irrespective of the market cycle. And first and foremost, we're focused on safety. And so we've got a clear strategy on maximising the return on our assets. We said that we would return capital to shareholders. And we said we'd repay debt. You know, we talk about the debt story. We repaid the first bucks that went, you know, when we got into free cash flow after the expansion of Solomon and Christmas Creek. We repaid $9 billion worth of debt. And we're now to the point where our shareholder returns is almost double that number. And you've got to go back to 2019, which is where we paid our first material dividend. 2019. It's not actually that long ago.
No.
So what is important to us is delivering on doing what we say we're going to do, which of course is the value of integrity, doing what you say you're going to do. And, you know, you've seen the benefits of that. And the pleasing part about, I guess, the last 4 years and being part of the senior executive team is that we haven't really done anything differently other than doing what we say we're going to do, you know, executing on our strategy and being true to our values. But in saying being true to your values, that doesn't mean you don't have hiccups. From time to time, you learn from things that haven't perhaps gone the way you'd like to. It always comes back to the same thing, just getting the fundamentals right. And I used to say through my career, you're talking to a consultant or somebody, or maybe folks in the business, you know, you need to dumb it down for me because I'm a simple country boy. I can't quite get away with that one anymore. Banners, but nonetheless, it's, you know, that's humility and vulnerability, and it's kind of like, well, what are the fundamentals that we need to get right? Because sometimes you overcomplicate it.
Yep.
And one of the great sayings that Andrew has, which I quite like, is anyone can make it complicated, but it takes a genius to make it look simple.
Nice one. And very, very relevant. Complexity can often take over.
Mm.
So in terms of keeping things simple, you often hear the word pioneering come out through the Fortescue message. I think with regards to looking at the recent history of Fortescue, the use of autonomous trucks, the way that you've got the world's fastest heavy haul rail, these sorts of things, it just shows progression on every level. Let's go to the other side, which is recently coming through, which is the Fortescue green ambitions.
Yep.
Do you want to just give us a bit of an insight into that and how you see things with your experience and where that ultimately will end up?
Well, the track record of Fortescue on doing what we say we're going to do, I think I'd start there. Andrew's vision and the company, the board's vision on where things are headed. Economics aside, decarbonising or industry or the world is critical to the sustainability as a human race. So
yes,
you sort of start there and go, well, we need to do it, and then the how is the application of, in the most part, technologies that are known. They just haven't been presented, prepared, produced at scale. So rather than focusing on the specifics on how it's going to be done, it has to be done. So you go, well, okay, we've got no choice. So let's get into it and do it. Joining Fortescue in 2010, there was a vision to expand the company to phenomenal numbers that, in the most part, folks went, well, this has never been done before, so how are you going to do it? And the organisation got in and made it happen. And those examples of autonomy or the trucks, and there's thousands of examples of doing things differently because you have to. And so I'd say that the green energy business is going to be along those lines, where Fortescue's got a target to decarbonise our iron ore operations by 2030. Are we going to do that? Yeah, I think we are.
yes,
Why? Because whatever needs to be done, we'll get it done. Again, getting back to
it's
my
almost like
previous,
history repeating itself.
it's empower the right people. We've clearly got a strategy of how to do it. That the how to do is down to the folks who know the answers.
Yeah.
Well, it's not me. I can help articulate the vision, but ultimately it's down to the technical folks who know how these types of things get done, and empowering them to challenge their thinking and saying, well, we can't do it at the same cost that it currently is now. It needs to be cheaper. So what do we need to do? And that's pretty much what the whole team at FFI are running around the world doing, finding assets that can produce hydrogen using green energy, whether that be wind or solar. We're doing that in Australia to decarbonise our existing business. So it makes a whole heap of sense to then leverage off that capability and testing pot when you think about someone developing a new battery electric haul truck. So that's being done in our operation, within our operations. Can you imagine a heavy mining equipment, an OEM, original manufacturer, negotiating with a major to potentially interrupt production to go test their equipment? That's just one simple example. So that's happening now. Those things are happening. So, the specifics, I think, are less important in this. It's the big picture.
Yes.
That's the strategy. Now we're working through the tactics on how that's getting done, and we're getting experts and folks who know how to do this, and also probably folks who don't yet know how to do it because they're going to work it out. So, it's a pretty exciting place.
Hugely exciting.
Organisationally, decarbonised by 2030 means that Fortescue would be producing iron ore that was zero carbon. 2030. So the next closest targets for others are maybe 2040 or 2050.
Yes.
So therefore, to put that into perspective, Fortescue's producing 200 million tonnes of iron ore, hematite, magnetite, 200 plus, for 10 years before the next competitor, 10 or 20 years even perhaps. So you can see the size of the prize and how suddenly the economics start to work. Appreciate that it's pretty hard to model that. It's very hard for people to put that into their MPV Excel spreadsheet. But we're kind of not at the MPV Excel spreadsheet level where we've got to do this, we've got to do it fast, and we've got to do it now.
And this is really what you're calling these stretch targets.
Yeah, the stretch targets are really about what is it that you want to achieve, and the stretch target is just simply saying you could take a Gemini style or a regulated asset budget that gets presented to the board, which says we can do 100, we'll put the budget in at 80. So we can under-promise and over-deliver.
Yes.
At Fortescue, we go, well, we think we can do 100 and we'll stretch ourselves to 120. Why? Well, because 100 is par. We need to do things differently. We actually don't know specifically how we're going to get to 120, but that's what we're going to do. And pretty much 9 times out of 10, sure enough, you find a way. think about a sporting sense. You're a high performer yourself. You go, well, I got 25 touches last week. I'm going to go out there and get what? What are you going to get, 25 or 20? No, I want to get more than what I did last week.
Yeah.
That's just an example of a stretch target. Because if you don't go for the 25 or 30 or 10% extra, what happens if you're a little bit off the mark or you've actually left something on the table? Elite sport is about leaving nothing off the table at the end, leaving nothing. Old mate Rafa didn't leave too much on the court, did he?
No, he sure didn't. And it's a really great analogy of way of comparing how Fortescue approaches its business.
Mm.
It doesn't seek mediocrity. It is looking to challenge the boundaries or the realms of what can be achieved.
Yeah, and so then consequently you look at the types of folks who work at a company like Fortescue. They're, I guess, elite level is not the right word to use, but they're high performers because they want to achieve, but also it's the matrix of performance and values. So where we all want to be is high performance, high values. Sometimes we mistaken that with high performance and low values. The Australian cricket team had their challenges a few years back, and I remember thinking at that point in time, and what the Australian cricket team said, unacceptable. So where do you reckon JL is on his matrix of high performance and high values? He's top right quartile, high performance with high values.
Yes.
Harder, way harder, much harder.
Yeah.
Sustainability factor, huge. Can you keep doing it over and over and over again? Of course you can.
Just fascinating. Could talk about this for a long time because not only is it exciting from a business learning perspective, but just watching this company unfold and how it continues to progress and, as I said earlier, challenge the boundaries is just super, super impressive. And from that perspective, you've got an amazing example in Andrew Forrest, who seems from the outside to, as chairman, be working 24/7 to achieve goals that he's very, very passionate and feels strongly about. You can see it in the way he presents and the way he carries himself around this particular issue at the moment, Fortescue Future Industries, but iron ore before that, and how proud he is about Fortescue as a business and the people within it.
Yeah, that's right.
It must be for the people who work with him, such an amazing example and role model.
Yeah, that's right. And living by values is important to Andrew in the high performance, high values. When you get an organisation, talk about culture starts at the top. And as you just articulated with respect to Andrew's public persona, but what he's doing is that culture starts at the top and works its way down. It's the same as organisations where the board and management are aligned on the strategy. Sometimes companies have some challenges when either the board are driving it and management don't agree, or management are driving it and the board don't agree. So, that alignment is important. But again, I'd get back to everyone's got a role to play in it. It's not just about one person or the leadership team. And there's a difference between vision and strategy and tactics. And for us, it's getting that balance right. The board's job is to set the vision and set the strategy, and then it's up to management to then execute. And that gets down into the tactics, and it's important to know where you're going to be able to make the right decisions to ultimately get to the end game. And we like to think about the end as we're starting and in the planning. So where are we headed? What's the end game look like? We might not know the specifics of every single component part all the way through, but ultimately start where you want to finish is a really powerful way of going through, and also coming back and holding yourself accountable to, no, remember we agreed this is where we're headed.
Yeah.
Let's not get distracted, and sort of comes back to the controlling the things that you can control. And I'd make the other point on, Fortescue as a company is now the group. It's not iron ore and it's not FFI, but it's a green energy and metals company, and it's a group. We're now international. We've had a number of international companies and operations in the past, mostly related to iron ore, obviously exploration. But, it's the Fortescue Group, and as you say, you mentioned sort of that at the beginning, and for Elizabeth and myself being the group, we've got folks that work in iron ore and with folks that work in FFI, it's a quite a different change in mindset. And so the future senior leadership roles in Fortescue from a group perspective that's changing quite quickly.
Yes, yes. Just moving a little bit, because I'm conscious of your time, I just did want to, you've been really quite heavily involved throughout your life in causes that you're passionate about. I know you've been involved with the Salvation Army for a long time, and also had quite a bit to do with the Alzheimer's Institute of WA. You've always felt it important to be able to give back. I use that term give back, but contribute to these causes. Just give us a bit of an insight into that. I know Alzheimer's is particularly close to both yourself and myself, but just your role in terms of what you've been able to give to the not-for-profit and that sector.
Yeah, I think it gets back to your core values of helping others, irrespective of their station in life, and being privileged in terms of having a good job and living a privileged life is something that I'm acutely aware of, because I didn't realise how humble my beginning was, because it was cool. It was great. I had everything I ever needed and didn't even realise there was other stuff that you could even aspire to. So taking that kind of approach, the community approach, on a Saturday morning, Dad would be up and off and out in the van to someone's farm because the roof had blown off. Saturday generally wasn't a work day, but he did it because that was what was required. The fair on the whatever day that was fundraising because Mrs. Coakley's house burnt down and we're raising money because her house burnt down. Like, that's just second nature. And the question of what do you need, what do you want? I got asked the question when I became CFO, Ian, you've got $10 left, what do you do with it? And I answered, I give it to someone who needs it more than me. So I guess that's the kind of person I am. Having the opportunity to do that, again, is a privilege. So at Alzheimer's, I did that for a period of time when I wasn't the CFO, and unfortunately I just couldn't fit it in. But what we did over that period was sort out their financials. It's not for profit, and what we used to talk about at the audit committee and board is that, yeah, it's not for profit, but it's also not for loss. Hardest businesses you can run, because the margin for error is pretty small.
Yes.
Of course, you have to make a modest return because you want to reinvest. So that was very good for my soul. We'd go into an audit committee and I'd talk about 100 and I'd say million accidentally, because I'm just come from Fortescue and it was 100,000, so they'd be freaking out for the number. So we had some fun times, but I saw that as a great privilege. And the Salvation Army runs back. People perhaps don't realise it runs back a lot deeper in terms of my father. So my paternal grandparents, Fred and Dorothy Wells, Salvation Armyists.
Okay.
And they were both, I think, captains in the Salvation Army. And my cousin is married to Warren Palmer, who's very senior in the Salvation Army. And as things happen in life, that the role that I play at the Salvation Army Business Advisory Committee came via I was replacing someone else that we were working with onto the committee. Warren's there. We put two and two together, and I've been on the committee for maybe 10 years, and I'm privileged to be the chairman of the committee. And part of the committee's role is to put business together with the Salvation Army to develop long-term relationships, so that the Salvation Army can then use those funds. We're really after perpetuity funds because, as you know, like with any business making long-term decisions, you need long-term sustainable cash flows.
Yes.
And relying on government is helpful, but of course things change, budgets and so forth. And so putting the Salvation Army together is something that we work on a lot, and part of the committee's role is to put businesses together. So hopefully folks are listening to the podcast and think, we'd like to get involved in the Salvation Army. Can help you do that as well.
When I look at your role there, you can see there's a lot of passion involved with that, and it comes through very loud and clear. You're clearly a passionate guy. You've thrown everything at sporting career for that small period of time. You managed to get there. You've gone on and pursued your career with intensity. You've got a wonderful wife and family. Have you found it difficult to balance life in terms of work and home? I'm sure it's been difficult in patches. Have you got that balance yet?
It's always a balance, I think, probably later in life, and perhaps that point I made earlier of allowing myself to be myself and sort of not being so connected with a phone and working 24/7. The roles do require a level of selfishness to get it right, and so you kind of look back and go, how did I do that? That was what was required, but I get back to the partnership where we made the choice early in life, and we were privileged to be able to make the choice that Mandy stayed home and looked after the kids. And that's paid dividends in terms of their upbringings, their lives. And, you know, I'm sure you'll agree you get feedback from others outside of your family on how great your kids are. They're a little bit different at home around mum and dad, but nonetheless, you know, you see those values come through, and you have a lot of pride in that. But Mandy comes along to work events and so forth, and she used to ask, you know, people ask me, what do I do? And I said, well, you're pretty simple, Dale. You just tell them that you're the executive chairman of the family business, because without her doing what she does, there's no way I could have done any of the stuff that I've done, and so, you know, it's a real partnership.
Yes. And
there's sacrifice involved on both sides, but you do that for the greater good, you know, like the strategy for business, I suppose, of what do you want to achieve in life. And when you get to the point where your kids are independent, both got jobs, got great futures, you kind of go, that was what I was really looking for. It's great that they're there, but how come they don't need me anymore? So it's the next stage that we're at, which again is a huge privilege, and it's the overnight success that took 50 odd years to achieve, Bennis.
Wellesley, it's been a good chat. I must say, when we have an opportunity like this to talk through what has been clearly a fantastic career, and it's not over yet. Clearly there's a lot going on at Fortescue in terms of their growth plans and where they're looking to direct the business. But what you've been able to articulate in a very forthright but understated and a humble way shows us, being myself and the listeners, a lot about you as a person and how you've been able to navigate your life, keeping true to yourself. And I think that says a lot for you. Really want to wish you all the best going forward. It's going to be challenging, but equally I can tell with every ounce of listening to what you've had to say today that it is going to be one hell of a ride and really exciting. So all the best with it from everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks again for having us and listening to the story. Yeah, I think it's really important to me to make a contribution, but to be true to yourself, and getting the opportunity of sharing my story with others is important to me. And so getting the opportunity, as I say, is a real privilege. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing, and good to see you.
Yeah, cheers.
See you, Wellesley.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Finding the Front, brought to you by the proudly West Australian wealth management and diversified financial services company, Euroz Hartleys. If you like what you heard, please don't hesitate to tell your friends and subscribe to the podcast through your podcast host of choice. If you have any questions or would like to contact us, please email our fabulous producer Bridget on communications@eurozhartleys.com or visit our website at www.eurozhartleys.com. This podcast has been general information only. Euroz Hartleys holds Australian Financial Services Licence 230052.